Good afternoon. Let's give a couple of minutes for people to join. Good afternoon. It's great to be here with you all online. My name is Anwar Gaid, and I am the Principal Plumbing Specialist at the VBA. I would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which our head office is situated, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. I pay my respects to their elders past and present. We recognize and value the outgoing contribution of the Aboriginal people and communities to Victorian life. Thank you for taking time out of your busy days to join us for this webinar on the key changes to the NCC 2022 Volume 3. This is the last session in the VBA's NCC 2022 Roadshow. Over the last 8 weeks, we have visited 15 locations around the state to meet with practitioners and go through the changes. And I have to say, it's have been fantastic to meet with people face to face, especially after the last couple of years of travel restrictions. We have had a great response to the Roadshow events with more than 1,900 building practitioners and 800 plumbing practitioners attending the events. Of course, it's not always possible to attend an in-person event, which is why we are holding this webinar. This session will recap the content that we have gone through at our in-person events and will be an informative overview of the National Construction Code 2022. As Victoria's building and plumbing regulator, the Victorian Building Authority safeguards Victoria's future. Through best practice regulation, the VBA builds confidence in our built environment, industry, and in a sustainable future for all Victorians. The VBA also takes an active role in engaging, educating, and regulating the building and plumbing industries to deliver positive social and economic outcomes for all Victorians. As a responsive, proactive, and a trusted regulator, the VBA's operating context is always evolving to meet the needs of the Victorian community. And that includes the roadshow briefings we have held around the state at this webinar today. Before I pass you into the capable hands of our technical advisor, I would like to quickly go over a few housekeeping items. Today's session is recorded and will be made available after today. Questions can be submitted and voted on via the Q&A function. Or you can email tech team back in the office a question at any time using the QR on the screen. I would now like to introduce you to Neville Campbell. Neville is a senior technical advisor within the technical and regulation plumbing team. With over 17 years experience in the plumbing industry, Neville has worked in both commercial and domestic sectors prior to joining the VBA. Neville is an adept technical report writer and routinely represents the VBA in matters before the Victorian Civil and Administrative Tribunal. Now it's up to you, Neville.
Thanks, Anwar. Good evening, everyone. This afternoon, I'd like to present you a few different topics that are all very closely related. The first topic is the plumbing regulatory framework, so we'll cover a brief overview of that. Second topic is a preview of the changes that have been made to the NCC 2022 Volume 3, or what is known as the Plumbing Code of Australia, or simply the PCA. Third topic is a preview of some of the Victorian variations and additions to the PCA. The final topic will be a summary of the key changes that have been made to the standards that are referenced within the PCA. As Anwar has already mentioned, we will take some questions through the Q&A function as we go, and you can upvote those questions. Regulatory framework underpins all the legal and technical aspects of what you need to know if you want to understand how the plumbing industry is designed to operate in Victoria. Key components of the plumbing regulatory framework are free to download. Throughout this presentation, you'll be provided with links to the topics of discussion via QR codes like the ones below. To access these links, simply point the camera of your smart device at the code and a link will appear. Click on the link and you are there. Regulatory documents consist of the Building Act of 1993, Plumbing Regulations of 2018, and the National Construction Code of 2022. However, today's session will focus on Volume 3, which is the Plumbing Code or PCA. And of course, the reference technical standards, many of which form the DTS or deemed to satisfy solutions within the Plumbing Code. Not included in this list of PCA reference documents are the standards for gas fitting and medical gas pipelines, as both are regulated at a state level and are not administered under the National Construction Code. I should also mention that the documents pictured on the screen here are representations of the printed copies. So if you happen to buy or download these copies, they may not look like that. Now let's look at how these documents relate to each other. The legislative requirements. The Building Act and the Plumbing Regulations are the two state-specific key documents. These documents deal with administrative matters such as licensing approvals and other functions, including the adoption of the PCA in Victoria. PCA specifies the governing and performance requirements for most types of plumbing systems. Governing requirements must be complied with and cannot be varied. Governing requirements are the mandatory rules and instructions for complying with the PCA. Governing requirements ensure that materials and designs are safe and fit for purpose. One example you may be familiar with is the watermark scheme. Performance requirements specify the minimum performance that a plumbing system must achieve. Performance requirements can be achieved by a performance solution, a deemed to satisfy solution, or a combination of performance solution and deemed to satisfy. Should just mention, you may hear me say DTS throughout this, but simply a reference to deemed to satisfy. Under the governing and performance requirements are the compliance options. Historically, the PCA would prescribe standards to meet the DTS provisions. This meant that if a plumber performed their work to the standards, they would automatically comply with the PCA governing and performance requirements. This is no longer the case. Some sections of the standards have been removed and relocated into the PCA. One compliance option for meeting the governing and performance requirements is a performance solution. Performance solution is effectively a tailored solution to meet the objective of the performance requirements and caters for new and innovative designs to be used where no DTS method currently exists. Where a performance solution is used, it must be at least equivalent to the relevant DTS provisions. The performance solution is an iterative process of agreement and documentation between the relative stakeholders. Excuse me. When issuing a compliance certificate that is certified under a performance solution, compliance certificate should be accompanied by the appropriate performance solution documentation, including performance-based design brief, test and analysis results, and a performance solution report. Another option for meeting the governing and performance requirements that most plumbers are familiar with is a DTS solution, which is achieved by following all of the appropriate deemed to satisfy provisions in the PCA. These often include things like the reference standards. The last piece of the plumbing regulatory framework is the certification requirements. Before undertaking plumbing work, the plumber should consider how the completed work will be certified. The completed work satisfies all the applicable performance requirements of the PCA, then a compliance certificate can be issued after the plumbing work is completed. If the proposed work cannot meet all of the deemed to satisfy requirements of the PCA, then a performance solution should be developed prior to the work commencing. The main event, the Plumbing Code of Australia. In August, after a meeting of all state and territory building ministers, it was decided that the NCC 2022 will be adopted on the 1st of May 2023. Access to the NCC is free, and if you register your details at the ABCB website, copies of all the latest NCC news and documentation can easily be accessed. Registration process is simple. You only need to do it once if you save your passwords. You can do this by going to the abcb.gov.au website or by pointing your smart device at the QR code on the screen. On screen now is a picture of the preview edition. As mentioned, the PCA 2022 will be adopted on the 1st of May next year. Now we'll look at the content inside the preview edition. This slide shows the table of contents. Preface and Section A are common to all 3 volumes of the NCC. The general section covers water services, sanitary and drainage systems, excessive noise and facilities. The schedule contains abbreviations, defined terms, reference documents and state-specific variations. One of the most significant changes is a structural change. With the structural change, it's that all 3 volumes will be digital or are designed to be digital. Technically, you could download each volume and print it separately, but if you did, you wouldn't have the ability to use the built-in hyperlinks to quickly cross-reference definitions and other information. Another significant change to the NCC is that all 3 volumes will have the same governing requirements. A1G3 sets out the scope of the PCA. The PCA contains the technical requirements for the design, construction, installation, replacement, repair, alteration and maintenance of plumbing and drainage systems in new and existing buildings. The PCA applies to these systems in all classes of buildings whenever plumbing work is carried out. Additionally, the PCA applies to sites where services are designed, constructed, installed, replaced, repaired, altered and maintained independently of buildings, for example, a water service or a fire service. The PCA applies from the point of connection to the point of discharge. The National Construction Code, or NCC, now uses the same clause numbering system across each 3 of its volumes. This system is called Section Part Type Clause, or SPTC, and it brings greater consistency to how things are arranged and how things can be cross-referenced. You may recall from an earlier slide that Section B sets out the requirements for water services. Here you can see 2 examples of the SPTC numbering system, which were extracted from Section B. Next, we'll look at what the SPTC characters mean. Using B1D4 as an example, the letter B indicates Section B. We already know that B1 is cold water services. The 1 indicates that it's Part 1, cold water services. Part 1 of Section B is specific to cold water services. The D indicates the type of clause. In this case, it's a deemed to satisfy provision. And the number 4 is the sequential number of the clause. So it is Section B1 deemed to satisfy provision 4. Using this numbering system, it's now much easier to look up and cross-reference using the SPTC format. Another significant change to the PCA is that several DTS provisions have been quantified. So what does that mean? Quantification is the expression of measurement of something. You'll see what I mean when we look at an example in a moment. One of the PCA 2022 initiatives is to increase the competent use of performance with a focus on plumbing practitioners becoming more familiar and capable of using a performance solution. So why is there a need to quantify performance requirements? Some performance requirements in the past were subjective. By quantifying them in the 2022 PCA, new code sets out objective levels of performance to meet and develop a performance solution. Having objective levels of performance will also reduce the risk of misinterpreting PCA requirements. As you can see here, performance requirements for 2019. In the PCA 2019, the performance requirements were subjective. For example, ensure water is provided at the required flow rate. In PCA 2022, performance requirements have been quantified. For example, flow rate can't exceed 3 metres per second for more than 1% of the time, because that would mean the pressure was too high. Quantified performance requirements give designers an objective level of performance to aim for and reduce the need to over-engineer a system. As you can see from this slide, all of these areas have been quantified. So we've got cold and hot water velocities, water service pressures, firefighting pressures and flow rates, Legionella control, pressure relief and temperature limitation, sanitary plumbing and drainage ventilation. Governing requirement changes. In Australia, it's now recognised that there are health benefits from limiting non-essential exposure to lead. As a result, new PCA governing requirements will limit the amount of lead that can be contained in any copper alloy product that is intended for use in contact with drinking water. Excuse me. Copper alloy plumbing products that are intended for use in contact with drinking water must have a weighted average lead content of not more than 0.25%. Change will bring alignment with international practice and will apply to copper alloy fittings, valves, taps, mixers, water heaters, water dispensers, boiling and cooling units, and water meters intended for installation in contact with drinking water. New leaded plumbing requirements have been included in the PCA 2022, which will be adopted on the 1st of May next year. However, manufacturers can introduce what will be called lead-free products before September 2025. In September 2025, the lead-free products will be mandatory. So even though they will be in the NCC 2022, there is a lead transition timeframe right up to 2025. So manufacturers may start to manufacture those fittings. You may see them become available on the market between 2022 and 2025. If you want to know more about the lead in plumbing implementation plan, it's available through the QR code on the screen. After the 1st of September 2025, any copper alloy plumbing product that is intended for contact with drinking water will bear a lead-free watermark symbol, similar to what is pictured here. These are variations of it. They contain the words lead-free, LF, and various sorts. Now we'll look at some of the section changes. Section B, Water Services, Part 6, Rainwater Harvesting and Use, has been split into 2 parts. Part B6, Rainwater Services, and now Part B7, Rainwater Storage. Part B1, Cold Water Services. There have been several minor changes to Part B1, including a reference to AS 3959 for plumbing in bushfire-prone areas. Water efficiency requirements have been aligned with the Water Efficiency Labelling Scheme, or WELS Star Rating Scheme. And there have been some new clauses added covering rainwater top-up lines. Also in Part B1, the DTS provision at B1D4, bushfire-prone areas, has been added. This is a new DTS provision for 2022. The reference to AS 3959 for plumbing in bushfire-prone areas has been added to highlight that there are specific differences for building and plumbing in these areas. The regions are broken into bushfire attack levels, or BEL ratings. This is a method of rating the propensity of a location's exposure to bushfire. This standard will now be referenced in both the BCA and the PCA to ensure consistency in the solutions and regulation of bushfire-prone areas. With respect to plumbing and cold water services, this standard encompasses areas for consideration that include materials, installation, penetrations, that sort of thing. B1, deemed to satisfy requirement 2, water efficiency. Worldwide, drinking water is a precious commodity. In Australia, sellers or on-sellers of plumbing products should supply products that are watermarked and have the appropriate water efficiency labelling scheme rating or WELS rating. If we take for the first example in this slide, a tap or outlet of a shower, basin, sink or laundry trough must have at least a 3-star WELS rating and not discharge more than 9 litres of water per minute. Part B2, heated water services. So Part B1, cold water services, Part B2, heated water services. Water efficiency requirements from Part B1, cold water services, also applies to Part B2, heated water services, and the WELS star rating scheme. Additional clarity has been provided on the application of heated water temperature control requirements, which are now provided in the PCA instead of the 3500 Part 4. We will talk more about that further down the track. B2 deemed to satisfy requirement 5, maximum delivery temperature. PCA now contains all of the maximum delivery temperature requirements. Previously, this information was part of the ASNZS 3500 Part 4 and has now been removed and relocated to the PCA. As I said, I will talk about that more when we come to the standards section. Part B3, non-drinking water services. This part sets out the requirements for any part of a non-drinking water service of a property. This can be recycled water, dam water, or any alternative source not supplied by a water authority. Rainwater is not automatically classified as a non-drinking water service. Part B4, firefighting water services, has had some clarification amendments. These include elevating standards used for firefighting solutions to primary reference documents and outlining the options for solutions in relation to fire sprinkler systems, fire hydrants and fire hose reels. In the PCA 2019, the solutions and reference documents used for firefighting water services were always available. But now it is clear what systems can be used by directly referencing them in the PCA 2022 Part B4. This means plumbing practitioners now have the additional method of compliance. For example, they could certify their work using a plumbing performance solution, which isn't an option for standards prescribed under the plumbing regulations. This slide just highlights the relationship between the Building Code of Australia and the Plumbing Code. For firefighting water services, the BCA outlines where a fire service is required in a building and what type of service must be installed. PCA outlines how to design and install these systems using the reference documents. This is a new DTS provision for 2022, and you can see how the PCA 2022 B4D3 now references the applicable firefighting water service standards. The slide shows the DTS provisions listed at B4D4 and B4D5 and references the applicable fire hydrant, fire hose reel standards respectively. B4D6 prescribes the additional DTS requirement, Australian Standard 3959 for bushfire prone areas, and is a new DTS requirement introduced into the PCA 2022. So just as the bushfire prone areas applies for hot and cold water, it also applies for firefighting water services. Part B5, cross-connection control. There have been major changes relating to cross-connection control requirements for Part B5 and reference specification 41. Part B5 and specification 41 now capture all of the backflow and cross-connection hazard rating requirements that have historically been located in ASNZS 3500 Part 1. When the NCC comes into effect on the 1st of May 2023, practitioners will need to use the specification 41 to find and cross-reference, to find the cross-connection hazard rating. And if the cross-connection hazard rating is not prescribed by specification 41, practitioner could certify their work under a performance solution and confirm the correct hazard rating has been assigned using the verification method set out at B5B1. Part B6, rainwater services. Content from the PCA 2019 has been split into 2 parts for rainwater services and rainwater storage. There hasn't been any technical changes to the provisions of these parts, since 2019. However, there has been a significant amount of rewording to split them into two. Generally, the code considers where drinking water is provided by a water authority, a rainwater service is a service provided for a non-drinking purpose, such as toilet flushing or garden taps. However, in rural areas where rainwater is the only source of water and used for drinking, this is considered to be a cold water service. Note that this part does not apply to rainwater used only for irrigation purposes. Also important to remember that if drinking water is not provided or available from a water authority, then roof collected rainwater is considered to be a cold water service supplied by an alternative source and must comply with provisions for a cold water service. Part B7, rainwater storage. This part applies from the point of rainwater entry to the rainwater storage, to the point of connection to the cold or rainwater service as applicable. And as outlined in the previous slide, where a water authority water supply is not available, then the storage of roof collected rainwater that is intended for drinking and personal hygiene is considered to be a cold water service supplied from an alternative source. You must comply with the provisions for cold water. Another important point to make is that backflow provisions for rainwater tanks remains the same as 2019, but a full review will be done for the NCC 2025. Section C, sanitary plumbing systems. Sanitary plumbing and drainage systems. There's only been one part change to this section. Part C, on-site wastewater management, has been added back into the code. There has been some other changes, I'm going to look at those shortly. Part C1, sanitary plumbing systems. This part sets out the requirements for any part of an above-ground sanitary plumbing system of a property, from sanitary fixtures to the point of connection to a sanitary drainage system. Traditionally, the method of sizing a sanitary plumbing system was relatively easy because every fixture had a fixture unit rating. And the size of the sanitary plumbing system, to size the sanitary plumbing system, you just totaled up the number of fixture units. However, on very large projects, it was determined that some sanitary plumbing systems that were designed using fixture unit ratings have resulted in oversized pipework, adding to additional construction costs. So for that purpose, Part C1, sanitary plumbing systems, now incorporates a verification method at C1B1, and we'll discuss verification methods a little further in this presentation. The new VM will mean that a performance solution may be used to reduce the excessive pipe sizing and unnecessary construction costs. Part C2, the ABCB is leading the world in sanitary plumbing and drainage pipe sizing research. This research has resulted in the development of a verification method for pipe sizing and enables a more efficient pipe sizing to be used for specific buildings to reduce building costs. Part C3, on-site wastewater management systems. As mentioned in the introduction to this section, Part C3 has been added back into the PCA for 2022. Part C3 provides a nationally consistent set of requirements for the installation of each type of on-site wastewater management system. This slide shows the different Australian standards that are referenced for each type of system. It's important that plumbers are aware of the relevant reference standards for the type of on-site wastewater management system they plan to install, and that plumbers contact the appropriate authority and obtain the correct permits before any plumbing work is started. This could mean that plumbers need to contact the local council to work out what types of permits and processes apply. Because if the necessary permits haven't been obtained at the planning stage, homeowners may not be eligible for an occupancy permit for their new home. Victorian variations and additions. As we saw earlier on in the contents page, state and territory variations and additions also contained within the schedules. As you can see here, they're highlighted. The Victorian sections are Schedule 10, and we'll have a bit of those. So in addition to the general section of the PCA, it also contains state-specific, state and territory-specific variations and additions. Governing requirements set out at A3 G1 number 2 highlight that Victorian variations, additions or deletions must be applied in conjunction with the PCA provisions. So this means that if you're reading the PCA, general sections, if there is a variation, a state-specific variation, you must also follow that, and I'll explain now how that works. Any provision of the NCC may be overridden by or subject to Victorian legislation. The PCA must therefore be read in conjunction with that legislation. Victorian variations are contained at Schedule 10 and include variations, additions or deletions to all sections B through E. Where a clause or part is varied by an individual state, it is indicated in a blue hyperlink that precedes the clause. As we can see here, B3D3, and then there's Vic B3D3 and New South Wales B3D3. This indicates that both of these states have a variation that overrides that. The extent of the variation may be as little as a single requirement, such as B3D3A, or a whole clause, such as B3D3. In this example, the PCA B3D3 shown inside the box is overridden by the Victorian variations as indicated by the wording delete B3D3 and insert Vic B3D3 as follows. Note that in Vic B3D3, only clause 971A and C are overridden, while part B of 971 still applies. This slide highlights the Vic requirements for cold water fire sprinkler systems. In particular, you should note that fire sprinkler systems must be in accordance with Part E1, the NCC Volume 1, which includes a number of fire sprinkler standards, such as the FPA AA 101D and 101H. In addition, fire sprinkler systems must be installed in accordance with the AS/NZS 3500 Part 1, and if an automatic fire sprinkler system is installed in a Class 1 or 10 building, it must also be in accordance with the AS 2118 Part 1, Part 4 or Part 5 as appropriate. The VBA has identified a number of significant errors and omissions in the 1 October version of the PCA 2022 that was published by the ABCB. Published version does not accurately reflect the Victorian requirements. For example, all the additions that appeared in the PCA 2019 were not included in the 2022 version. The ABCB office is currently working with all states and territories to review, update, and later publish a revised version of the PCA 2022. So make sure you're subscribed to the ABCB online, the NCC online, and the ABCB newsletter, so that you can be informed of the updated version when it's later republished. Roof drainage systems, also known as Vic Section F, was among the affected variations. When the NCC is republished, the DTS general requirements will now include HB39 as a reference document. This means that the requirements can now be varied by performance solution. In addition to this, 1B of this DTS also states that where any conflicts between the AS/NZS 3500 Part 3 and HB39 occurs, it's the AS/NZS 3500 Part 3 that prevails. Updated reference standards. While many reference standards have recently been updated and newer versions referenced in the PCA, one of the standards that's most frequently used by plumbers is the AS/NZS 3500 series. An updated version of this series was published in 2021 and will come into effect with the adoption of the PCA 2022 on the 1st of May 2023. Now we'll look at some of the most significant changes to the 3500 series. This won't be a definitive list of changes, but I will focus on the changes will affect plumbing practitioners in their daily work. ASNZS 3500 Part 1. Changes to Part 1 of this standard have seen some backflow provisions removed from the standard and relocated to Part B5 of the PCA 2022. This means that the PCA must now be used in the process of determining a hazard rating. For this purpose, Specification 41 prescribes specific examples of individual and zone protection. If no example exists, the compliance of the installation could still be confirmed through using a performance solution by using the verification method listed at B5V1. Note that B5V1 does not override a hazard rating, which is already prescribed by Specification 41. Now we'll look at an example of the new DTS provision for drinking water backflow protection using a prescribed hazard. Each hazard must be assigned an individual or zone protection hazard rating in accordance with Specification 41C4 or Specification 41C5 of the PCA 2022. In this scenario, there's only one hazard, so we'll be looking at individual protection from Specification 41C4. Number 3H of this schedule describes handheld bidet hoses and trigger sprays as a high hazard for the purpose of individual protection. Now that we know the hazard rating, we should request the local water authority's advice on the level of containment protection required. Once hazard ratings have been confirmed, the appropriate backflow prevention device for the hazard rating can be selected and installed for each situation in accordance with Section 4 of the ASNZS 3500 Part 1. Next, we'll look at a drinking water backflow protection where there's no prescribed hazard rating. In situations where there are no examples of specific installations prescribed by Specification 41, compliance with the NCC can still be demonstrated through a performance solution process. While this might sound difficult, the process is set out at A2G2, and the complexity of a performance solution only needs to be consistent with the complexity of the job. For users of the PCA, Part B5 now contains a simple verification method for demonstrating that an appropriate hazard rating has been assigned. Verification methods, B5V1, will guide users through an assessment that will allocate a score for the building class, on-site water services, drinking water use, cross-connection type, and the extent of contamination. The sum of these scores will confirm that the minimum hazard rating has been achieved and simplify the performance-based design brief process. The VBA also does have some good material, previous webinars, etc., on our webpage. So changes to ASNZS 3500 Part 2. Clause 66242, new installations. In above ground sanitary drainage systems, where a 100mm junction connects a 100mm branch pipe to another 100mm branch pipe, the entry level of the branch pipe must be rotated to 15 degrees above the horizontal. PCA 2022, Vic Variation C1D3 amends clause 66242 so that it still applies to all classes of buildings, except that for class 1 buildings where the 15 degrees cannot be achieved, the incline must be as close as possible to 15 degrees to avoid straining. Clause 4912 has the same 15-degree requirement for 100mm junctions in drains and applies to all classes of buildings, but only applies to drains below ground. Here you can see a picture taken from a video that was made by an association of plumbing inspectors in Queensland. The picture shows the effect of reduced flush in a conventional 1 in 60 drain. As you can see, the green test liquid runs upstream to some degree in each of the branch junctions as it passes. If you would like to see the video in full, it can be accessed via the QR code picture here. So just to highlight that, you can see the end of the water there and here. Changes to AS/NZS 3500 Part 4 have seen heated water delivery temperature and temperature control provisions removed from the standard and relocated to Part B2 of the PCA. Essentially, the requirements for delivery temperature and temperature control devices have not changed. What has changed is that plumbers now need to refer to the PCA for this information. Also in 3500 Part 4, separation between above ground heated water pipe and electrical services has been reduced to bring it in line with the AS/NZS 3000, which is the standard for electrical installations, the AS/NZS 5601.1, which is the standard for gas installations, and the AS 3500 Part 1, the standard for cold water. Some of you may be aware, previously under the 2018 version, there's different measurements between the 3500 Part 4 and the 3500 Part 1. They've now been reconciled, so it's 25 mil across the board. Changes to 3500 Parts 1 and 4 introduced requirements for holes in steel framing. Changes bring the hot and cold water standards into line with the building code and the National Association of Steel Framed Housing, or NASH code, as referenced in the NCC Volume 2. AS 2419 fire hydrant installations. Part 1, System Design, Installation and Commissioning, was republished last year with several differences. The old version was not suitable for very large buildings. Many of the provisions were outdated, and it provided little guidance on designing performance solutions for very large buildings. As you can see from the slide, the size of the standards increased significantly. The body of the documents increased by 30%. The appendices have increased by roughly 160%. So this is a significantly larger document. Along with the 3500 series or 3500 Part 1, if you install fire hydrant systems, it's time you got an updated version of this standard. AS 1428 Part 1, General Requirements for Access in New Building Work, was republished in 2021. While changes to this standard were minimal, the most notable change from 2009 was a reduction in the acceptable zone for flushing control. Highly recommend you get that one also if you do this sort of work. Throughout the webinar, throughout the seminar series, there's been a number of frequently asked questions. So what I'll do now is I'll talk through a few of these. Question 1, the 15-degree junction rule will affect ceiling heights. Is there anything being done to building practices to accommodate the new requirements? The answer to that is the VBA is considering how the new 15-degree junction requirements should be best communicated to building practitioners, building designers, and architects, as they all have a role to play in building practices. Question 2, have manufacturers and wholesalers been advised of the new requirements regarding lead content in plumbing products? And the answer to that is the industry will be made aware, and these changes do not come into effect until the 1st of September 2025. So we have plenty of time. The Australian Building Codes Board, or ABCB, is the administrator of Watermark, and they have already engaged with industry on the new requirements. They will also continue to work with the Watermark conformance bodies who have responsibility for certification for plumbing products to ensure there is a smooth transition. Well, this is not directly related to the changes in the NCC. It was a frequently asked question when discussing performance solutions. The question specifically was, why did the VBA remove the charged stormwater technical solution sheet, and why aren't these systems accepted anymore? Technical solution, the answer to that is the technical solution sheet on charged stormwater systems was for guidance only. Unfortunately, a number of practitioners misunderstood the content and applied it beyond the scope and limitation of what it was intended for. Please note that charged stormwater systems can still be installed under a performance solution approach. However, you must ensure you follow all the requirements associated with this method if you are using it. For more information on the performance solutions, see the ABCB or VBA websites through the QR codes on your screen. In the time we have available, we'd like to now answer some of the questions you've put in the Q&A. Remembering that if you have a question for the VBA Plumbing Tech team, please don't hesitate sending an email using the QR on the screen. And if you haven't already done so, the QR code on the right-hand side will enable you to register to download a copy of the PCA. Back to you, Anwar.
Thank you, Nev. We haven't received questions on the chat or the Q&A. Just a minute, last minute, if anyone wants to drop a question on the chat.
It's most unusual.
Well, remember, there is still opportunity that you can scan some of the barcodes on the right, just to go to our website and email our tech team. There is a question here, drop difference between the BCA and the NCC.
The BCA is, the NCC is the suite of all three volumes of the National Construction Code.
Yeah.
The BCA is the building code. So that's volumes 1 and 2, or Building Code of Australia, while volume 3 is known as the Plumbing Code of Australia.
Yeah. Okay, thank you, Nev. Another question on the chat. Will all backflow devices needs to be re-rated? So that question in regards to the backflow devices. Yeah, go ahead,
I'll answer that one.
Yeah.
Existing backflow prevention devices that are installed will not need to be re-rated.
Yeah.
It'll only apply to new installations after the adoption of the National Construction Code.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Matt. Another question we have on the chat: have the height requirement clearance of cooktops changed?
That's actually a gas question. So it's not an question.
Yeah, that's correct. Just to give a second to warm up, I guess this is in relation to the update of the 15.06.1 part 1, where there is a change, but there is a transition period. To you, Nev.
I'll let Matt or Greg.
Yeah.
Matt, yeah, okay.
So the requirements will change with the adoption of AS/NZS 5601.
Yeah.
On the 1st of March next year, because it has been published, but it's not adopted till the 1st of March.
Yeah.
There will be a new requirement for cooktops to have a 650 mil clearance from the top of the trivet to the underside of the range hood for new installations. But if you've got an existing installation where you're doing a cooktop or range hood changeover, the 600 will still apply as long as the range hood clearance is not greater than 600. So if you've got a range hood that states 650, it will need to go back in at 650.
Yeah. Thank you, Matt. Question here. Hi, is VBA considering to bring back the charge system as a DTS with more special design and installation requirements?
Yeah, I'll take this out anyway, if you like.
Yeah, go ahead, Greg. Thank you.
My camera's not working. Yeah, the charge stormwater systems were never, they've never been able to be certified under a DTS because they were never in the standards. If you wanted to make change, you'd have to make that change to the committee if you wanted to get them installed in the standards, but that's outside the VBA's jurisdiction.
Yeah. So, thank you, Greg. Another question on the chat: has the rule around tempering valves changed, and are they now required for hot water changeovers?
I'll field that one.
Yeah. Go, Nev. Thank you.
The rules haven't changed.
It might be interesting, Nev, just to touch on that. If you've got an existing hot water service that has a tempered supply, you can't remove a tempering valve. So if you're doing a changeover on a tempered supply, you have to put a tempered valve back on that supply, but not on a straight like-for-like changeover.
Thanks, Matt.
Yeah.
I'd like to add something to that as well.
Yeah. Go ahead.
If you, as a plumber, you don't. It's not mandatory to put a tempering valve when the original didn't have a tempering valve, but the plumber still has a duty of care to offer the client one. And to protect yourself as a plumber, I would actually state that on your compliance certificate, because quite often on the tech lines we get the question, but I'm really worried. I know I don't need to put one in, but I'm really worried that they've got young kids there. What happens if they burn themselves? Does that mean I'm responsible? Well, if you put on your compliance certificate, that puts the responsibility back on the property owner, who has to take responsibility for their own property.
Okay. Thank you, Greg. Other questions? Can an 88-degree junction with an male-female 15-degree bend be able to be used in a horizontal position?
I'll field that one, Emma.
Yeah.
The answer is no.
Yeah.
No.
Thank you. What is the VBA option on collecting trafficable roof area for reuse? That includes toilet, flushing, irrigation. What kind of treatment plant is recommended? So the question is regarding collecting water from the trafficable roof areas for reuse, and what kind of treatment plant we would recommend.
Yeah, depending what it's the purpose it's being collected for, as to whether it's going to be a cold water service, considered a cold water service, or a non-drinking service. If it's going to be considered a drinking service, then it needs to comply with the cold water provisions. Some of the objectives around that require certain. One of the objectives is to prevent illness. So, while there may not be any specific requirements set out in there, to achieve those objectives, the plumber would need to follow, would be advised to follow cold water or rainwater standards that ensure the water quality is good enough.
Yeah, thank
Nev,
you.
just touching on that, there's good information on the Department of Health website in relation to reuse of captured rainwater. And there's also a document, which is the N-Health document, which gives really good information about the quality of water and how to treat and reuse water that's captured from a roof.
Thanks, Matt. I'm also told some council health officers are not particularly keen on drinking rainwater. So I may pay to check with them.
Yeah, especially trafficable area, the practitioner should be very careful of retreating this and send it back to the cold water. So this is one point I would add. There is another question here. Will the plumbing regulations be changed to allow homes to install heat pump water heaters powered by mains? So I may need to read the question again.
I'm happy to answer this.
Yes, 10. Yes,
Yeah.
10. Go ahead.
So hold on a second. Is my video on?
Yes, it is.
We can see it.
Fantastic. Yeah. So at the moment, obviously, there are no plans to change those existing requirements as such. But I know that government and the VBA have obviously received inquiries regarding that. And if there is going to be changes, we will of course let industry know. But at the moment, it's not proposed yet. But having said that, though, there is a link to. There is some different changes in relation to BCA energy efficiency requirements. So some of you may know that the current requirement for new Class 1 homes to install either solar water heater or rainwater tank is linked to the 6-star requirement. When the BCA 2022 comes in next year, from 1st of September, there will be new energy efficiency requirements, and those changes will impact on this. In relation to that, I would encourage you therefore to link it back to the BCA requirements, because they will override those requirements.
Yeah, thank you, Tim. We don't have any other open questions on the chat.
I think if we don't have any other open questions, Anna, we could probably wrap that up.
Yeah, go ahead, Nev.
Okay, thank you for attending this VBA webinar. We appreciate that you've given up your time to attend, and we hope you found the information we've provided to be of value. If you have any further questions or would like additional information, please use the QR code on the screen to contact the VBA plumbing technical team. Thanks for your time, everyone.
Thank you.